welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. Now, Lisa, I don't know when episode this is going to be because the last one was 1,150. So the reality is we might be at 1,000, who knows, 200. But I have Lisa Bodell on the line with me, and you're joining me from, if I remember correct, don't let me get it wrong. Tell me where you are joining me from. I don't want to mess it up.
In Westchester, just outside of New York.
Okay, Westchester.
Yep.
And this book is called Why Simple Wins.
That's it.
And the subtitle is Escape the Complexity Trap and Get to Work That Matters. That's right. Get to work that matters. More importantly, get to thinking about what matters as well. I think sometimes we gloss over it and just think, all right, let's just go to work. But I'm going to tell the listeners a little bit about you, Lisa, if you don't mind, because I think it sets a context for the book. And by the way, folks, the website is futurethink.com, and that's futurethink.com. Great name. Don't know how you got that.
Fun.
She also has a toolkit for simplification that is on Amazon as well as this book. But Lisa believes in the power of simplification, obviously. She is the founder and CEO of FutureThink, a company that uses simple techniques to help organizations embrace change and increase their capabilities for innovation. She brings her compelling message to more than 100,000 people a year, showing them how to eliminate mundane and unnecessary tasks from their everyday routines. She's transformed teams within organizations like Google, Novartis, Accenture, and more. Drawing on practical Midwestern upbringing and entrepreneur background, she has used the power of simplification to launch 3 successful businesses, write 2 books. One of them is called Kill the Company and Why Simple Wins. She travels a lot. She just told me she got back from traveling all over the place. And she's on several advisory councils, and you can learn more about her at futurethink.com. Well, let's get to the heart of the matter, which is really, as we say, the key to this, right? So I think sometimes people don't understand how things get so complex.
Yeah.
On the other hand, your book, Why Simple Wins, heightens the danger of complexity in the workplace. Yet we know the workplaces are filled with complexity. What are the most common signs that you see as somebody who travels the world, speaks to these companies, consults with these companies, provides them tools to get untrapped from the complexity? And how can leaders recognize these signs before it's really too late?
I'm really glad you brought it up. It's funny because I always say we create the beast that we become a slave to. We don't realize our role in creating complexity with the best of intentions. And the signs are things like this. First of all, you have a lack of speed, an inability to get to move fast enough and meet deadlines. And usually that has to do with the volume of work. You're starting to see burnout among your team. And they're becoming more disengaged because they don't feel the work that they're spending their time on matters. The other thing you're seeing is people are organized, but they're not simplified. And so, there's a lot of things that we organize. There's a lot of reliance on apps and processes and spreadsheets. But at some point, you cannot spreadsheet your way out of complexity. It's a volume game. And the last thing I'll say is I see an addiction to more versus less. And what I mean by that is I know a company or a leader that's really good at focusing on what matters when he asks people not just what's wrong with how they work, but what can they stop doing? That's when you really know that there's somebody that's not just about getting more done or urgency, but getting the right things done. So those are the kind of signs that we look for. Yeah.
Those are the signs. You know, I relate to a conversation I had with an author who just met me, who came down from Bend, Oregon. And his name's Glenn Van Pesky. And he built an ultralight backpacking company, which is quite successful, and many other companies. And the book is called Take Less, Do More. What's interesting is the lessons you find about emptying your backpack when you think about ultralight backpacking is literally the minimalism that you want it to get as light as possible, as little as possible, right? And his whole thing is about, and yours as well, how do I lighten my load? How do I get rid of some of this weight that I'm carrying up the mountain? Because all of us seems to be carrying so much up the mountain. In a backpack, it weighs 3 times more than it really should.
Well, and what you're getting at, and I think he's getting at too, which is it's separating the necessary from the unnecessary.
Right.
And that's what we talk about, because then people will start to say, you know, they have a fear of letting go. It's a very human thing. They have a fear that less isn't as valuable. And they have like an emotional attachment of getting rid of things. It's like a loss. And so we really have to have them separate necessary and unnecessary. And there is necessary complexity, just like there's necessary things in your backpack.
Right.
But what that forces you to do when you go ultralight is really pare down the things that don't add value, don't have meaning, that really are the most important things to reach your goals. And you do the same thing at work. It's the same thing with meetings. It's the same thing with how you spend your time. It's the same thing with reports. It's the same thing with clients. It really focuses on that kind of 80-20 rule of what is most important. Because really the currency, he's talking about backpacks, I'm talking about time. That's the difference. My currency and my backpack is time. And I want to unpack the things that aren't worth your time.
Well, and I think all of us has to have a checklist before we go somewhere, right? So the reality is...
No, I'm here with a checklist.
Yeah.
It's not not about just being organized. It's being simplified. Like you can organize an incredible backpack and stuff it with all kinds of stuff, but it's going to be too much. So it's, again,
well, people in the workplace today are dealing with the weight of the complexity. And that's why I use that analogy, because it is breaking their backs. All right. So you describe simplicity as a strategic advantage, which obviously it is. But how can companies shift their mindsets, meaning the people's mindsets inside the company, to see simplicity as not just a cost-saving measure, but as a driver of innovation and growth for the company? Because I think when people give something up, they actually think they're giving something away. But that's not true.
Not true. No.
Yeah.
I like what you're saying, because I think the companies that are successful around innovation are the ones that also are successful at simplicity, because they realize this is not just about being organized, being productive, being efficient. Those are byproducts when you simplify. But if all you're doing this for is just to be more organized or more productive, right, to get more done, that's not a very motivating message to people. When you talk about it's about getting meaningful done, that's different. So my positioning around simplification is this is a cultural and ethical issue. It's ethical because it is about how we spend our time and how we're almost boundaryless with it. We give it away. And it's also, it is a cultural thing, because I think we underestimate the importance of getting how we work right. Because if you get the work right, you get the culture right. And it's the compass for how you spend your time. So if I say to you, what do you spend your day doing when you come home at night, and you tell me that you spent your day in meetings and emails, that is the culture of your company. That is what you are spending your time on. But if I ask you what you did and you say meeting with clients, recording my podcast, doing important things, that is the culture. And so how we work, the work we do every day matters. And simplification is the key driver of that.
Yeah. And so let's talk about meaningful work, because every Gen Zer, almost everybody across all age groups is looking for meaningful work today.
Everyone is.
It doesn't matter. It isn't age related.
That's right.
Would you share a success story where a company embraced simplicity, because stories are always the best, and saw significant improvements in employee engagement and productivity. So let's say, okay, it was both. We got the productivity, we got engagement, but also a happier, healthier. David Allen was just on the show, and they were talking about a healthy work environment, right? How do we create productive harmony, right? And so my question would be, it's not just like, how do we get more done, but how do we have more fun doing what we're doing and know that there's more meaning in it for us? So when we come home at night, we go, hey, guess what? We just invented the rocket ship that could go to the moon, or whatever it is, something that I can really say was significant and meaningful.
So, I love that you bring up David Allen. I'm a huge fan of his work around productivity. And, the thing that I talk about that's a little bit of a shift from that is, again, the culture piece is not just about productivity, but this is about, it's actually a well-being message.
Mm-hmm.
It is related to mental health. And that's like, if you get the work right, you get the culture right. And the example I can give you is it's interesting. It was with Vancouver City Credit Union. And I was talking there with their chief simplification officer when she first came on board. Mm-hmm. And she said, we were so stuck in like getting technology to help us serve our customers better, like come up with a process. She said that we missed out on the human element of asking people what the time sucks were, like what bothers or what wastes their time. And so by going through this process of killing rules and asking people what their time sucks were and putting them through simplicity sprints, what was so interesting was it forced people to define what meaningful work was. It forced them to define and call out what was annoying, not just for the customers, but for themselves. And they reinvented work. And the results were they got together 18 different groups in a year. And they killed it was over 300 forms, 175 steps out of major customer interactions and processes, and got rid of, I think it was over 300 policies. So just by asking, they were able to eliminate a heap of work. But the result, I said, how did you know it was a success? One was they achieved their highest customer satisfaction ratings ever because you valued the customer's time. But internally, they brought down turnover, engagement went up, trust levels went up on the employee surveys, and ability to get things done. So you had all these benefits that were, they were productive, but people's engagement and they're willing to not just stay, but be engaged overall and focus went up dramatically, over 24%.
That's a very, very good story. Now I'm going to make a comment. Hopefully, our governmental bodies will hire you to get rid of the complexity.
Well, we do a lot of work.
I'm sure you do work within certain branches of the government. The question is how do we get it so that it becomes a main focus of theirs, right? Of everybody in government. So look, there's some steps organizations have to take to simplify, and you've got obviously your toolkit, simplification toolkit. In trying to simplify operations, because normally it's about operations. It's the paperwork we create to get something done, to make sure something is recorded, to make sure
some of it.
The books. Yeah. So what are the common pitfalls that organizations listening to this, or the simplifications officer? This is the first time I've actually heard that there's a simplifications officer.
Yeah.
That's good. Are common pitfalls that they should avoid during this process of assessing how they become more simplified?
Well, I mean, a couple things, which is, being organized isn't being simplified. So don't fall into the trap that just because you create a process that you simplified something, you didn't. Mm-hmm. Right? This isn't about just if you think about the Marie Kondo analogy, it's not about her organizing all the crap in your closet. It's about getting rid of the crap and then organizing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's an element to that, right? The other thing is, don't fall into the trap of trying to do things that are too big. And what I mean by that is focus on your sphere of control. And because when you ask people what they spend their day doing, it's not like regulatory. I mean, unless you work in legal or regulatory, it's not necessarily organizational. It's meetings and emails. It's daily complexity. It's reports. It's things we put in place. and things that we have more control over than we realize. The other thing is it's time sucks, it's redundancies, it's decision making. It's cultural norms. It's rules that have outlived their time that nobody told them. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it's not just processes. It's behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's including too many people in a meeting. It's not clarifying what the meeting is for. It's CCing too many people. It's not asking, not having a clear communication in what you want people to read or give you feedback on. So it's lack of decision-making or lack of clarity on who gets to decide what. So there are many different things that you can do beyond processes when you simplify. And the key is sticking in your sphere of control to get started.
Your spirit of control, is that what you said? Or spear?
Your sphere. So
your sphere. Thank you. I'm glad you clarified the word you used. Because I heard it as
work you. No, your sphere control. Because you want to have control over your daily work. Like your team sets your culture. The CEO sets the culture, but really it's your team. It's the team you work with every day. It's their behaviors, it's their norms, it's their rules, it's their approach to work that sucks up most of your time. And yes, there are people outside of it, and we're matrixed and all that. But if you start in your sphere of control and you look at get rid of what's wasteful, but then agree on how you're going to change your behaviors, it is amazing how much time you can get back. Like, so for example, at NBC, and we work with them, being uninvited to a meeting is now a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they agreed, let's include the least number of people possible in meetings because everyone's time is too important. So they cut out the whole FOMO element. And it was almost better to be uninvited to a meeting because your time was too important rather than sitting in the meeting.
Agreed. I mean, actually, when I did the interview with David recently, they brought up the same thing, that if you didn't get an agenda, they did it at a big financial services firm. And if I'm repeating myself, I am, because it's important. And you weren't included, you weren't on the agenda, then you don't show up. So the reality is just lots of people stopped showing up to meetings, which then saved a lot of time and simplified things and reduced the amount of time that people were sitting in meetings. So here's the conundrum. I've been around long enough. I don't know about you, but actually before the internet, before all these web-based tools that exist, cloud-based software. And the conundrum is that technology plays a role in contributing to help solve the problem, but also creates complexity in organizations as well. So how can company, I know you're laughing because this is a big conundrum. It's like, okay, yeah, let's get Asana, and then, are we using it? Or let's get whatever the program is. How can companies leverage technologies to simplify rather than complicate?
There's a joke I always say is when people say, has technology helped simplification or hurt it? And I say the answer is yes. And, right? Because there's so many things in my life that I'm like, oh, I can't imagine like not having the app to do this. It's just so much faster. It's automatic, all those kinds of things. The one click. However, technology without clarity, and just because you can doesn't mean you should, are things we need to think about. And what I mean by that is, well, just because you can add one more thing, do you need it? And the other thing is, one of the reasons that the how of work, the way we work every day is so complex is we have too many ways to communicate. So I've got email, I've got Slack, right? I've got Teams channel, I've got the phone, I've got Zoom. It's so easy to set things up that we've become lazy about it. And we haven't clarified, for example, like they do at Netflix, meetings are for decisions. Emails are for information. Phone calls and Slack are for urgency. Don't use all three for the same thing just to see where you can get me first. Use each channel for its, fit for purpose. And I think that would cut down a lot of redundancy. We're creating too much noise because we can. It's easy.
I agree, and I'm sure everyone listening out there agrees with that statement.
I'm sure. Yeah.
The thing that they need help with is, how do I get people to shift their mindset about how they use the tools? Well, so that's going to be my next question here for you. Okay. As these organizations grow, obviously all these tools get inserted in more and more and more. Slack, you were mentioning just some of them. What strategies can companies use to help employees shift the mindset about how they utilize these tools to become more simplified and make their life easier?
I think the first thing is one is communication, like communicating that your expectation is that people simplify. Because I don't think we realize the amount of fear people have around it. I mean, they'll give you tons of ideas, but actually doing it, they're afraid that they are going to get rid of the wrong thing, that they won't be seen as valued, that they'll miss out, that they'll get fired. And so communicating that it's an expectation. I expect you to challenge work, to kill rules, to get rid of things that aren't working. It's part of your job is important. The second thing is if the leaders don't do it, no one else does it. So for example, we worked with, the head of Pfizer when Albert he was not yet CEO. We were working with them on their simplification. And one of the things he said he had tried at first that didn't work was telling people to say no to meetings. And I mean, what a great thing. Everyone was complaining about it. So he said, great, say no to meetings. And a month later, when they looked at, people's logs of their calendars, and he could see in the hallways how people were still stressed, he was upset because everyone was still going to meetings. And he asked his chief of staff, what's going on? And his chief of staff said to him, well, they still go to all the meetings because you still say yes to all the meetings. So until he stopped, no one stopped. So we have to model the behavior. Mm. Then on top of that, I think the thing that you need to do is do an exercise with people of what do they spend their day doing, and ask them to circle how much of that is meaningful work. Because you've got to get you've got to have them see how much of their time is wasted. And then you've got to have them see, well, if you weren't doing that work, what would we be doing? And define what meaningful work is.
Do you have an indicator of what this is actually costing U.S. businesses or just any businesses to have this level of complexity? Because when I say cost, I'm going to say cost in money, time, which can then be equated into money. But in the end, most people relate to dollars. How much is this costing us? But I think it's costing them in so many areas that aren't being measured. For instance, creativity, right? Innovation. I'm going to say happiness, meaningful things, right? So you look at two sides of this. I can say, well, we used to refer to it as the human value equation. It's like, really? Okay, so you're worth so much to us. And so I know there's dashboards that are actually tracking all this shit. And inside companies, they see the numbers of emails that go out and the Slacks that go out. And there's somebody that looks at all of that. And the reality is that's freaking mind-boggling to me, because they're trying to measure a KPI like that and come up and say, oh, yeah, we were more productive because we sent out, 8 million emails today or whatever. Come on,
Well, there's a few things. Yeah, there's a few things to that. I mean, depending on the study that you look at, right? We're talking about billions and, hundreds of billions of dollars and millions of dollars. But there are a few things about that. And there are even, there's jokes about how Microsoft and Teams wanting to actually, when you schedule a meeting, if you input the amount of time each person is worth, they can calculate the value of the meeting and see how much is being spent, right? So that's an interesting metric. If you could actually do that when you set the meeting up, I think we would schedule meetings differently. We'd think about the time, we'd think about the frequency, we'd think about the invite. So it would force us to have an agenda. So I think that's really important. But, you're talking about measurement. They can measure the cost of a meeting and they can measure the cost of an email. But what we have found is until you change the reward system, it's going to be really hard to get people to stop that. So for example, what Pfizer was trying to do was tell people to have less meetings. And so people had got rid of the meetings on their calendars, but they shifted them all to phone calls. So they're not technically meetings, right? So this is what I mean. So people are smart, right? There's a workaround for everything. So they could look good. The metric that you measure matters. And I think it's going to be really important. We're seeing this like at Sanofi right now, that making part of people's performance review about eliminating things and stopping things is very important. In fact, at Sanofi, they are building into their strategic plans. You're not just going to ask people all the things they're going to do next year, but you're asking them what they are going to commit to stop doing. And they reward them and hold them to it. So those are the kinds of things. It has to be at a personal level and a team level. It has to be rewarded. And it has to be something where more than just like meetings and emails. It's got to be more tangible things like steps taken out of the system. It's also measuring things like in your employee engagement survey, ability to get things done, amount of innovations in the pipeline, amount of time dedicated to thinking. There's a lot of other things that are kind of softer that drive innovation that people are starting to measure rather than just productivity.
Point well taken. Now, flip side of the coin. And I'm sure you've got an answer, but as you know, basically what happens, are there any dangers like we've got into with lean, right? So this whole concept around lean. So we're going to innovate something, but we're going to do it a lot quicker because it's going to save more money, but we're not really having as many meetings around it. And then what happens is we end up having to redo it all over again. So, and this is an honest question, as I just was talking with Stefan about it when we're talking about innovation. It's like, oh, but we tried to do it too quickly. We tried to simplify it too much. Where would you land in that? I know that sounds like a weird question, but I think a valuable one because many companies now are trying to go the lean route.
So one of the things I talk about in even my earlier book called Kill the Company is that, you know, I see a purpose for Six Sigma and lean and agile project management, 100% for processes. I think that is project management, product development, etc. But, you know, where I'm talking about is the work of work. And what I mean of that is you're not going to spend your time Six Sigma email, Six Sigma meetings. These are more behavioral driven and more micro driven. And I think what people do is they get really into, again, they fall in that trap of let's do processes. And I think then they fall into one size fits all and they optimize things, but they haven't necessarily hacked them properly. And so I guess the thing I'm getting at is I think lean and Six Sigma and agile, those are all great, but we're not focusing on the work of work. And that's where most people spend their time. That's where we undervalue and underestimate the importance of getting those things right.
I think the work of work is a great statement for people to take away from this podcast, because it's almost like, you know, when you prep to do a speech, they say, well, I'm just coming to do a speech, but you spent 6, 8, 10 hours prepping to go there for the speech, right? To go do the speech. That's the work of work, because then you only gave a 40-minute talk, right?
There's much more involved. Yes.
But it's very relatable to people when they realize, hey, I'm being charged for not only the work of work, but then the work. The work was you contracted me to go do a speech. I had to spend 6 hours to get prepared for that. And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about is that prep prior to the actual work. That's really a very expensive part because you're only speaking for 45, but you're spending 6 hours preparing for the 45-minute talk. Is that right?
Well, it is. But I think the thing that you're talking about to me is another key differentiator, which is, you know, when I was talking about asking people what they spend their day doing versus what they want to spend their day doing, what we're talking about here is something very similar. Are you spending your time or are you investing it? And most people will say, oh, well, we needed that meeting. And I'm saying if it's not getting to the end goal, I spent the time, but I didn't invest the time. And that's the problem with so many people is they are not intentional about how they spent their time and they give it away. It's boundaryless within so many organizations. And if we were more intentional by defining meaningful work and being able to know what can I say yes to, what can I say no to, I think we would get out of the over-engineered, lean Six Sigma kinds of processes, because being organized isn't being simplified. You're following a task. It feels good, right? We all love it, engineers, scientists, etc. But it's not necessarily getting us to the goal that we want. And then we can better decide where should we spend more time and less time. So I think you have to have subtraction before you have addition. That's really what I get at.
Yeah. I always relate to this, and I may have related this to you before. I do listen to Jordan Peterson somewhat, and while some people think he's wacky, he said, you know, we all have a contract with the future. And the question is what is the sacrifice in the present for the contract with the future? Now, some people will tell you I'm not making any sacrifice in the present for my contract with the future. But when you look at simplification, the reality is, hey, I would like to remove what you may think of as, and I'm going to use this term, my sacrifice. I don't look at it as a sacrifice. I look at it as the work of work. But let's make it so that the work of work is less in the front end than on the back end, right? Because I want to enjoy my contract with the future. Okay, I'm not saying give things to me. I'm saying I will work for them, but I think I'm doing way too much nonsensical work to actually enjoy my contract with the future. Does any of that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense to me, which is, yeah, because that's the other thing, which is about, we're so stuck at kind of on this executing our calendar that we're not really driving ourselves forward. And what I mean by that is most people think just because they do the same thing over and over again and it's familiar, that's very human, right? And it's organized, that it must be good. They think they're in a groove. But I like to say they're not, they're in a rut. And the problem is they look and feel the same. And the difference to know groove versus rut is, are you spending time or are you investing it? You're investing it if it's getting you towards the future, if it will help you. You know, investing your time is getting rid of things too. You're spending time if you're not driving forward towards the future, right? So I would argue that people that are not making any sacrifices or they're not being mindful or intentional about their time, they're just spending time. They are not driving towards the future. But if you're intentional, you know what you'll say yes to and what you say no to, you are driving towards the future. And that's hard, by the way. It's not, it sounds like, oh, it's so easy. Just say yes, just say no. A lot of people aren't empowered to say no.
Well, I think where people get a lot of freedom from all of this. And I remember doing this interview like over a year ago. I'm trying to remember the author's name, but she wrote a book called Flux. And she became very famous about how you look at life. She actually was 19 and lost her mother and father in an automobile accident in Europe when she was 19. So they both died. The point was that perspective shift for her said, how am I going to flux in life? How am I going to be able to pivot? How am I going to be able, and I think today pivoting is one of the most important things that we can have as a value to a company, to be able to pivot,
It is.
Yeah.
But I would add though, one of the things I say about simplification is, I think one of the things that happened during COVID is everyone was told to pivot and everyone was told to be agile because they were waiting for the next unnecessary or unplanned crisis to come up, right? They had to be ready for the next thing. And the goal of flux, I think, or simplification is you don't want to be on defense. That's not what it's about. Right. You want to be on offense. So the reason you simplify is so you can be not just be ready for the next thing, but when you see the thing that you really want, you can pivot towards it. You're driving it versus reacting to it. And I think that's the difference between a company that's simplified and a company that's complex. They are reacting when they are complex. They can pivot to the next emergency, but they're not driving forward to anything. And simplification companies, they create that future. They can
drive. They can actually focus on something in the future and create it and manifest it. And I get that. So look, we are in a world of information overload. You've even said it. Data everywhere, ability to analyze beyond analyze. How can organizations manage the influx of all of this data that's telling them on their dashboards about certain things that are going on inside their company without falling into the complexity trap? Because I think what happens, Lisa, is they rely on this data to make decisions. And then they should to a degree. But the question is where is their intuition in the process? Where is their gut feeling around this? Because I think when they use intuition in the workplace, and I'm bringing this up as a result of intuition at work. Is it that where can we actually use this data along with our intuition to simplify?
So what you're getting at, which I think is important, is thinking. The reason that you want simplification It's so that you have the space and time to think,
Mhm.
because that will allow you to grow, come up with ideas, create a problem, solve, innovate, etc. And I think one of the problems right now is with data, just because you can doesn't mean you should. We rely on it too much versus our gut. But the reason for that is in the absence of time to think, just do what the numbers tell us.
Mhm.
So there's a reason why we have so many reports, but we can't take action on them. We don't have time. There's a reason we have so many reports, but even though our gut tells us something different, we don't do it. We don't have time to think. So by getting rid of and having the space, I think you should have data. You should have reports, but you need to have time for the deep work of thinking. And so my hope for people in terms of how they use their time with intention is to start mandating more deep work, more thinking time.
Ah, I love it.
Yep. So you can actually, you can innovate, because all the data doesn't matter. If all you're doing is staying internal, it doesn't matter. But it's what you do with the data, right? Thinking to take you external. And that's what simplification does. It's free.
Well, I can remember stories being told, and Stephen Covey Jr. has been on here several times. And at the Covey organization, they used to give people signs for their doors that says, "I'm thinking."
Okay.
And they used to put it out front. And actually, Covey used to encourage that. He used to say, hey, you need to have thinking time, not doing time. So I think this whole being-doing conundrum is a big issue. And Barnett Bain, the guy who worked with Robin Williams in producing a bunch of movies, wrote a book about the conundrum of being and doing, which I thought was fascinating.
Interesting.
Yes, because it is like, how do I actually think and then apply what I've thought? And I think many people run from thinking because they've found an easier way out, which is relating to the data that comes through the pipelines.
Well, or I would say, one of the things I talk about, I'll never forget, because I sit on a board at Novartis, and I was talking with Boss, who's the CEO, and he asked me a question because I said, people really value being busy.
Mhm.
And one of the things they talk about at Novartis is being unbossed, right? Meaning you have control. You're the lead in your own play. And being unbossed, he said, is great because it makes you unbusy. And I said, yeah, but that's interesting, because when people are unbusy, they are uncomfortable. And what leaders have found is they know they're doing something right when they get time back and they start to feel uncomfortable, because they're so used to doing. They have to remember how to dedicate unstructured time to thinking. So it's like one of the first signs, I think, when you're doing it right is you're uncomfortable because you're not busy.
That is, it is, look, and that comes from us. And if it is any one thing I could say is it's your ego saying you're not enough. So no matter where that came from, whether it was childhood or adolescence, and your parents said you should be a doctor and you didn't become the doctor and you're not enough, you're carrying all this not enoughness around. Now, I'm not saying on the flip side of the coin that we should be a sloth, but we definitely need time to think and reflect, like on Walden's Pond. So the point is to reflect about our story, ourselves, and our point for existence, right? Which leads me to our final question here. If there is one big key takeaway that you hope readers will take from Why Simple Win, what would it be from Lisa's standpoint? And then how can they immediately start working with it, whether they're a solopreneur, a company working on a big team inside of a company like Novartis or something, or they're the CEO of the company, which all three people listen to this show. So I like to give a takeaway that could be universally across all platforms.
That successful people subtract just as much as they add. And I think that the reason that's important is because they know the importance and the value of time. So the only way that you are going to be successful is if you know what you want And that's not by doing everything, that's doing the most important things. And so being a leader, or even in your personal life, a person that is not afraid to say no or to get rid of things is the person that's going to be happier. They're going to get to their goals. They're going to focus. They're going to have more clarity because they know what matters. They're doing it for themselves. They're not doing all the things for everybody else. So if you could build in subtraction, I think that you'll realize you have more control to do that than you realize.
So well said, Lisa. Thank you for being on Inside Personal Growth, spending this time for all my listeners. Go to futurethink.com. Also, we're going to have a link to the book. Here it is, Why Simple Wins. And namaste to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being on the show and sharing your wisdom. Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.